All right. So welcome to goRIA, fueled by investment news. And I'm Chuck Fala, and I'll be broadcasting live from the, I'm going to call it legendary FPA NorCal conference here in beautiful San Francisco. And we're starting off, as we like to do, with a bang with a legend himself, Michael Kitces.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Chuck. It's good to be out for another FPA NorCal. I think this is their 52nd annual conference, which if you do the math, basically is like the origin of financial planning in the early 1970s, and they've been here ever since.
Absolutely, and I think they're starting to get it right.
They got a pretty after the first 40 something years, you get your processes pretty dialed in. So that's good.
They do for sure, and I'm sure they have for quite some time. But it's a beautiful location and a great conference, and I believe one that you peg as one of the best ones for advisors. Yes?
Yeah, we have long highlighted this as one of the best conferences out there for advisors. I mean, no joke, maybe after the first 20 or 30 years, they seem to have gotten their process really dialed in. So yeah. I think this is I was trying to figure it out, probably 16th or 17th consecutive year coming out for this conference. And just, It's good every year. It's good every year. Like, they have such a strong process about how they identify and bring in speakers that it's just consistently a very high quality conference year after year after year. And if you're so inclined, it's in beautiful San Francisco, and they always do it on the Tuesday, Wednesday after Memorial Day weekend. So it's a very good like vacation destination conference. You can come to San Francisco, go up to Napa Sonoma Valley, or spend time downtown as you wish for the long Memorial Day weekend, and then take your tax write-off for 2 days of conference before you fly home.
That's my favorite part.
Yes, you got to do good business planning.
Absolutely, and it's a write-off, and I think there's certain rules, like a couple of days before, after, whatever, but might as well take full advantage of that.
I wouldn't have done the rest of the trip if I hadn't been here for the conference.
Absolutely. Prove it. Okay, real good. So I know your time is limited, and I really appreciate you taking some with us here today. And I am looking forward to your presentation, which is coming up in about an hour or so.
Yeah.
And the title I love is My Advisory Firm Normal? So for those in the audience that are not lucky enough to be here live to see you today, give us a little taste of what you're going to talk about.
Yeah, we're going to talk about some of the metrics, some of the business metrics that you look at to understand. In essence, is my advisory firm generating the profit it should? Are my numbers normal compared basically to everybody else's numbers? And we're going to do it from a kind of a looking at your profit and loss statement as a financial advisor and some of the key metrics that come forth. I joke sometimes, like, give me just 4 or 5 numbers about your practice, and I can tell almost everything that's going on in your business. I just need to know what your revenue is. I need to know how many clients you've got. Now I can figure out your revenue per client and understand the kinds of folks that you serve. I need to know how many advisors you have. So now I can start understanding your capacity, because I just divide your clients by the number of advisors. I want to understand how many team you have in total. I can understand now your operational leverage of the business. How much are you providing support staff to maximize the efficiency of your advisors? And then tell me a little bit about your growth rates overall. And I understand whether you've got a healthy marketing and growth machine, and to some extent whether your other numbers are out of whack or not. Because if you're going a little faster, you tend to have to staff for a little more capacity because you got all these clients coming on board. If you're growing a little slower, you should have a little bit more margin and productivity in your team. And what that really brings you down to from those 4 or 5 numbers is a series of essentially are ratios of my clients per advisor, my clients per staff, my revenue per advisor, my revenue per client. And those numbers are remarkably comparable across advisory firms, particularly when you get into some productivity metrics, like how much revenue at the end of the day are my advisors responsible for. I see some firms out there, we work with a very high net worth space. We're super high touch. Our advisors are full and they've got 17 clients. And I see other firms say, no, like, we serve a long tail of mass affluent, and we've got 150 plus clients. And then I start drilling down on them, like, okay, well, the firm with 17 clients is charging like $40,000 or $50,000 per client because they're a really high touch. The firm with 150 plus clients is charging a couple $1,000s per client. And then we back in the numbers. It's like, oh, your advisors actually manage basically identical revenue. You're just different compositions of clients.
That's interesting. And so we talk about going RIA here. So, and we were talking a little bit about before the camera went on.
Yeah.
On the fact that, in the broker-dealer world, and this is not to bash the broker-dealer world, but it's to put a spotlight on the differences, right? So in the broker-dealer world, you have some levers to optimize your business practice. Is it fair to say in the RIA world you have more levers that you can pull and dial into to optimize your practice?
Yeah. So in the simplest sense, in an advisory firm, and basically any advisory firm, you can kind of take your P&L and break it into a couple of buckets. There are what the traditional finance folks would call your direct expenses. This is like the cost to actually do the things for the clients. In our world, like the cost of your advisors to deliver advice. And that's usually somewhere around 35 to 40% of your revenue when you get your service, your advisor costs, your business development costs, your investment costs all in there. Then there's some portion of overhead, what it takes to run the back office of the business, right? My admin, my staff, my support, my compliance, my tech, my office rents, and all the rest. Typically, that's somewhere around 35% of my revenue, plus or minus a little. And if I take my gross revenue and I subtract my direct expenses and my overhead, I get to my profit margin. So when you view it from that perspective, when I look at a typical broker-dealer firm, advisor affiliated with a broker-dealer, they usually have a relatively low overhead expense. They don't have a lot of back office staff. Right? They're not spending on compliance consultants, and they don't usually have some simpler tech costs because some of it's built into their platform in the first place. But they pay a portion off their grid and possibly some other platform fees to access that. And so as I view it from the pure advisory firm perspective, when you affiliate with a broker-dealer, you're literally making a conscious choice to say, instead of hiring some staff back office people and spending some money on compliance and tech, I'm using this platform that has, a line item cost, something off the grid, maybe some other things that layer on, in order to cover that expense. So whether that comes out better or worse, frankly, depends on the advisor and what they do. If you really use the heck out of all the things that your broker-dealer platform provides, often those numbers reconcile pretty well. If you're sort of square peg in a round hole and you don't use a lot of the stuff that's in your broker-dealer platform, but you're implicitly or explicitly paying for it, the numbers tend to look a lot better when you reconfigure, because it all essentially comes down to, look, there's this list of things that you just have to do to run an advisory firm. And so either you're going to pay them out of pocket, or you're going to pay your broker-dealer to cover them, or you're going to pay your corporate RIA affiliate platform to cover them, right? We have a lot of different configurations now in the industry, but the cost to run an advisory business, the cost to run an advisory business. The question then for the advisory firm business owner is, are you choosing the right platforms and partners who cover those costs most efficiently while delivering the level of service and quality that you want that's important to you?
Okay, that sounds good. And just to kind of go back to the idea of a profit margin, and which we all kind of like the idea of profit margin. Do you have any scale and some thumbnail sketches on what a good profit margin should be for revenue? And is it different by size? I assume the bigger the firm, the more the profit margin, or you tell me?
Well, so the striking thing actually that we see when you look at the industry benchmarking data is there are basically no evident economies of scale anywhere in advisory firms.
Really?
$2 million firms tend to have the same 2 million revenue firms tend to have the same margins as 10 million revenue firms, tend to have the same margins as 20 million revenue firms. By the time you're at 20 million in revenue, you're literally like a multi-billion dollar RIA. So maybe some scale shows up after that, but most people can spend 30 years never getting to $1 billion or $2 billion. So if the scale shows up beyond that, you're literally not seeing it in your lifetime. That doesn't mean the firms aren't still profitable. What you really see across the industry is profit margins for most advisory firms sit somewhere between 25 to 30%, give or take a little, essentially across that whole spectrum. Now, notably, that's bottom line profit after the advisor pays themselves for the work that they do in the business as an advisor. So like when I'm a solo, like I get the advisor comp line, which might be 40% of my revenue, and then I get the profits, which might be 25 or 30%. So often as a solo, I'm like, what's this 25% thing? Like I take home like 2/3 of all my gross revenue. And it's like, well, yes, because you're taking the advisor line and the profits line. If you want to do this, like if you're going to grow and scale and build to a multi advisor firm, at some point, most of the advisor comp isn't you. It's the other 2, 3, 5, 10 advisors that are hired in the firm. They get that comp. You get the bottom line. But when you drill down to that bottom line, you get back to numbers that look closer to 25 or 30%. But those don't particularly get better or worse as the firm scales. What we see is the firms that drive the higher profit margins are, they tend to be a little bit better adopters of technology and system and process, because that does help manage your overhead costs a bit. The biggest driver by far is simply that they actually charge a proper fee for all the work that they do. They're not doing a ton of shadow work for their clients that they're not charging, getting paid for, because that drags down productivity margins for everyone. And then the third is, have they aligned their cost structure with the way that they actually do business in the first place? So, if I'm part of a platform that's got a whole bunch of alts, and I don't mostly use alts, I'm like a DFA passive guy, I tend to end out with a lot of platform fees that aren't really well aligned to my advisory firm. And so that alignment of, am I as a business owner spending costs on the things that are a really good fit and providing me good service as a firm, becomes the third big driver. And so that shows up in everywhere from, am I at the right BD? Should I be BD versus RIA because I'd rather just strip out some things that my BD isn't doing? Am I unhappy as a solo RIA because I don't like hiring and managing all these people and I need to affiliate back with some corporate platform, because sometimes that crops up as well. But are my costs aligned with what I need to run my business for my clients?
Right. I think that's a great way to sum that up. And I know we're kind of short on time. So any sort of final thoughts you want to just toss out? It could be really anything.
I think the biggest thing that I would probably highlight is, in the industry, when we talk about size of firms, then we start kind of comparing, how successful is this business? What do its metrics look like? We almost always talk in terms of AUM, and AUM basis is kind of the common metric that we all use. If you really want to understand the health of your business, though, the first and foremost, the starting point is not AUM, it's revenue. It's hard dollars. It's how much is actually coming in. Because I can talk to two advisory firms that have $300 million, and like one does it because they've actually got $1 million clients that they charge 1% each to, and they're driving $3 million of revenue. And the other one has, one big whale client that's got like $50 million because it was a client that got huge and they stuck with them. And then they also do some 401k business. They got like $100 million that they're only billing like 30 or 40 bips on. And then they've got the practice, but it's got a wide range of revenue. And the reality is like, okay, this $300 million firm only has like $1.5 million of revenue. And the first one had $3 million of revenue. And the first one has 300 consistent clients, and the second one has like one whale and then like 500 little clients attached to their 401k plans that are challenging for them to service. And so just looking at assets really doesn't give you a good perspective on the business. Revenue is the big driver. And when you're going to look at revenue, the most important thing is to get all the way down to how much is being paid in total for the collective services that you're providing. And the reason that I highlight it that way is what I see, particularly with people that are affiliated with platforms. I see this show up a little bit in the corporate RIA structures and a lot in the BD structures. As someone comes and says like, well, my GDC is this and I get a 92% payout. And so I'm only paying my platform 8%. And I'm like, well, what do you use for investments? Like, oh, well, I use their internal platform. Like, oh, cool. They do that for the 8% grid. And it's like, no, there's a 25 basis point platform fee for that. I'm like, well, it's cool. But that means, so when you tell me you charge 1%, your clients aren't paying 1. They're paying 1 plus the 25 bips for your platform. They're paying 1.25. And so if you're taking 92 points off the grid, you're taking off 92 cents on the dollar. It's not 92 cents on the dollar. It's 92 cents on $1.25 that the client paid, which means your payout's not 92. It's like 70 something or high 60s. And that might still be a fine number because, again, typical advisory firm pays 35% in overhead plus or minus 5. So even if you're paying a third to your platform, if they're really covering everything that happens in your back office, that actually can be a fair rate. But if they're not, and then you've got like all these other expenses you're paying on top of their stuff, then it starts to raise the question of, well, are you actually well aligned? Or are we in the realm where you're paying for more services than you're actually using? And if you went out and did it separately, you could reconstitute that in a way that's more profitable for the firm.
That's great. I think that's a great place to end it for today. And just kind of a sidebar, this little promo here, but we wrote an article for Investment News about 7 or 8 months ago now called True Net Payout. And I'll put a link into that. And long and short, just to kind of sum up what you said there, it's not your nominal payout, right? We talked to so many advisors, I'm getting a 92% payout. Well, you're not, right? Because it really should be, what is your client getting charged, right? Your fee plus all the other fees and what's going into your bank account. And normally that delta is not exactly 92%. It's quite a bit more.
And it, just to say, like, there's no magic where the average independent advisor runs their practice with 30-something% overhead and you're running it with 8. The answer is no. Like, everybody's got overhead. There are costs to do this business. Like, I don't mean to knock any platform for doing that, but I do hear a lot of advisory firms that talk about their their payouts and their margins, and they're not putting back in like platform fees and other charges that do accrue to the client. It is part of what they pay that really do come back. Or conversely, I know an advisor recently who transitioned from BD channel to RIA and realized like my clients are basically paying 1.25, my one and my platform's 1.25. And so he switched and went independent, and he said to all his clients, I've got great news for you. I'm cutting my fees. You're going to go from 1.25 to 1.2. But he got a 20% raise.
That's right.
Because his number went from 1 to 1.2, and then he had to replace some broker-dealer costs when he left his platform. But what he quickly realized is like, yeah, he had, I forget what it was, like $50-something million. So the more enough dollars there to say like, okay, if I got to spend $10,000 on a compliance consultant who's just going to literally hold my hand through every compliance thing every quarter, it cost me $10,000. I'm making like $500,000, 2% of my revenue. Like my fees went up by 20. If I got to give back 2 to cover the compliance costs, like net, I'm crushing this. And he sort of came back and said like, I'm pretty sure I could have done this at like 20 or 30 million. I didn't actually need to wait until 50 because there are ways to solve for those things externally. Yep. And if that's what you want to do as a business owner, that's your opportunity out there.
Without question. And that's a perfect place to end it for today. So Michael Kitces, thank you so much for taking some time.
My pleasure. Absolutely. Thank you,
And I'm
Chuck.
looking forward to your presentation.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
All right. Real good. So this is our first one for today. And I will be here today and tomorrow again at FPA NorCal. And stay tuned. I'll be back in another hour or so with some more content. Thanks for joining us. All right. Awesome. Thanks again.